I told the child his birth was a mistake and he was illegitimate. His mom went NC immediately. Now I've lost everything and have the audacity to demand she sell her home and fund my failed business. I said it to a 9-year-old. I want you to sit with that before I say anything else. Before the context and the circumstances and the version of events I spent 18 months constructing to make myself the misunderstood one. Before the justifications I offered my remaining friends and the explanations I gave my therapist, and the letter I wrote to my daughter that she did not open. I said it to a 9-year-old boy who had done nothing to me. Who had not chosen his parents or his origins or the circumstances of his birth. Who was standing in a kitchen asking where his mom was, and I told him, in words I cannot take back and have not stopped hearing since, that his birth was a mistake and that he was illegitimate and that he should ask his mother why she had decided to bring someone like him into the world. I said that to a child. And then I spent the next year and a half being angry that his mother cut me off. That is who I was. I am writing this down because I need to say it plainly at least once, without the cushion of context, before I build the context around it. Because the context is real and some of it is painful and some of it even generates a kind of sympathy that I do not deserve to receive without first establishing what I did with it. I said it to a 9-year-old. Start there. My daughter's name is Renata. She is 34 years old and she has been the best thing I have produced in my life, which is a sentence that costs me something to write because it implies correctly that my mothering of her has been inconsistent at best, and that her quality as a human being is something she arrived at largely in spite of me rather than because of me. She was born when I was 22, to a man I was not with for long, in circumstances that were difficult and that I navigated badly. I was not a terrible mother in the acute, visible ways. I fed her and housed her and showed up for the school plays and the graduations. I did the structural things. What I did not do, consistently, was the emotional work. The seeing her clearly. The prioritizing her interior life over my own needs and dramas, and the revolving door of relationships and business ventures that characterized my 30s and 40s. Renata grew up knowing she was loved in the way that children who are structurally cared for know they are loved. She knew, and she also knew that the love had conditions attached to it that she had not agreed to and could not always meet. She is a good woman. She built that goodness herself. Simon was born when Renata was 25, from a relationship that ended before he arrived. His father is not in the picture, has never been in the picture, and this is a fact about Simon's life that is simply true and that has been handled by Renata with a matter-of-factness and a warmth that I now recognize as extraordinary and that I, at the time, handled with judgment I had not been asked to deliver and had no right to offer. I do not approve of the circumstances of Simon's birth. I want to be precise about this because precision is the only honesty I have left to give. It was not that I did not approve of Simon. It was that I had opinions about how children should arrive in the world, opinions rooted in my own difficult experience of single parenthood and in a set of values I held more rigidly than my actual life had ever honored, and those opinions had calcified over the years into something I experienced as principle but that was actually closer to judgment dressed up in the language of concern. I made those opinions known to Renata before Simon was born. She heard them and she absorbed them the way she had always absorbed my opinions, with a patience that I mistook for agreement, and that was actually the practiced endurance of a woman who had been navigating my feelings her entire life. She had Simon. He was healthy and beautiful, and Renata was a mother with a wholeness and a steadiness that I had not managed at her age, and I watched her do it, and somewhere in the watching I found, not the graceful revision of my prior judgment, but a low-grade resentment that she was doing something well that I had done badly, and that she had done it on terms I had not sanctioned. This is not flattering. I am not trying to be flattering. I am trying to be accurate. For 9 years I was in Simon's life in the inconsistent, conditional way I had been in Renata's. Present at the holidays. Present for the birthdays. Present in the moments that had a social architecture around them that required presence. In between those moments, available at my own convenience and unavailable when my own needs crowded out the peripheral ones. Simon was a sweet child. I do not say this to perform retroactive affection that I did not consistently demonstrate in real time. I say it because it is true and because it matters that it is true. He was curious and funny and gentle in the way that some children are gentle, as a personality trait rather than a performance. He would ask questions with the focused intensity of a child who actually wanted the answers. He remembered things people said to him and referred back to them in later conversations in a way that made you feel, when you were with him, genuinely heard. He was 9 years old and he was good at making people feel heard. And I said what I said to him in the kitchen. The circumstances that led to the kitchen, I have used as context for long enough that I need to be careful about how I present them here. Because the circumstances are real. The circumstances produced real pain that I was genuinely experiencing. And the circumstances explain nothing about what I chose to do inside of them. I had been going through a collapse. The business I had been running for 6 years, a consulting operation that had been moderately successful for most of those 6 years and that I had expanded too quickly and too expensively in the 7th, was failing. Not slowly and ambiguously. Failing in the fast, concrete way of missed payments and lost clients and numbers that do not bend back no matter how many spreadsheets you make. I had put money into this expansion that I did not have, borrowed against things that could not survive the borrowing, and by the time I was sitting in Renata's kitchen I was looking at a financial situation that had no clean resolution. I had also been through the end of a long relationship that same year. The man I had been with for 4 years had left, not dramatically, but with a finality that I had not anticipated and that had produced in me the specific, destabilizing grief of someone who had believed themselves more loved than they turned out to be. These two things together had done something to me. I do not say this as an excuse. I say it as a description of the state I was in when I arrived at Renata's house that evening, a state of pain that had been building for months and that had not been adequately expressed or processed and that was sitting in me like something pressurized. The pressurized thing found a release. It found it on a 9-year-old. I had come to Renata's because I needed money. This is the part that does not appear in the version I told for 18 months. In that version I had come over for dinner and a difficult conversation had occurred. In the accurate version I had come over with a specific ask that I had been building toward for weeks and that I had decided, with the particular recklessness of someone who has run out of other options, to present to my daughter as something she was obligated to help with. I wanted her to sell her house. Not to give me the money. To sell it, take the equity, and invest it in the restructured version of my business that I had convinced myself would work if I could just get enough capital to get through the next 6 months. The house Renata had bought 3 years earlier, the first significant asset she had ever owned, the thing she had saved for across a decade of careful, disciplined choices, the house where she was raising Simon. I had decided that this house was a reasonable source of solution to my problem. I want you to understand the full shape of that entitlement before I get to the kitchen. Because the thing that happened in the kitchen did not happen in isolation. It happened at the end of an evening in which I had presented this request to my daughter and she had said, with more gentleness than I deserved, that she was not going to do that. That she was sorry I was in the situation I was in. That she loved me and wanted to help me find a path through it, but that the house was not something she could offer and she needed me to understand that. I had not understood that. I had responded to her refusal with the escalating pressure of someone who believes that persistence is a form of argument. I had said things about obligation and family and what a daughter owes a mother. I had said things about Simon and the cost of raising a child alone and how I had managed and she could manage too and the house was just an asset and assets existed to be used when family needed them. Renata had remained calm through this in the way she always remained calm, the practiced steadiness of someone who had been managing my emotional weather since childhood. And then she had gone to check on Simon, who was supposed to be in bed. He was not in bed. He was in the kitchen, having come down for water, and he was standing in the kitchen doorway when I came in, and he asked where his mom was, and something in me that had been pressurized for months found its target. I remember the exact words. I have tried, in the year and a half since, to find a version of my memory where the words are different, where I said something less than what I said, where the cruelty of it is softened somehow by misremembering. My memory will not cooperate. I told him that his birth had been a mistake. I told him that he was illegitimate, using that word, that specific word, to a 9-year-old who would have had to look it up to understand it, and who was going to understand it eventually and would remember where he first heard it. I told him to ask his mother why she had brought someone like him into the world. He stood in the kitchen doorway and he looked at me. He did not cry immediately. That is the thing I cannot get out of my head. He looked at me with a 9-year-old's face processing something that a 9-year-old face is not equipped to process, running the words through a comprehension that was not yet built for what I had just put into it. Then Renata was in the doorway behind him. I saw her face. I have seen a lot of things in my life. I have been in difficult rooms and hard conversations, and I have seen grief and fury and disappointment in various forms. What I saw on Renata's face when she looked at me over her son's head was different from all of those. It was not fury. Fury would have been easier to absorb. It was the face of a woman who had just watched her mother say something unforgivable to her child, and who in that moment was making a decision I would spend the next 18 months trying to unmake. She knelt down to Simon first. She turned him away from me and spoke to him quietly and walked him toward the stairs. She did not raise her voice. She did not address me. She took care of her child. Then she came back. The conversation that followed was short. I had started, already, to explain. The pressure of the evening, the stress I was under, the words coming out wrong. I had started to construct the framework of mitigation that I would spend the next 18 months elaborating. Renata let me finish. She waited until I had said everything I had to say in that first attempt. And then she said, in a voice that was very quiet and very clear and that I have not been able to stop hearing since, "You need to leave my house now. Do not contact me or Simon. I will reach out if and when I am ready, and I need you to understand that I may never be ready." She walked to the front door and opened it. I left. She closed the door behind me. That was 18 months ago. The no contact has been total. I want to be precise about this because I spent a long time characterizing it as a reaction, as something emotional and temporary that would resolve when she had processed her feelings, and I need to be accurate instead. Renata blocked me on everything. My phone number, my email, every platform. She told the one mutual connection we had, a cousin, that she was not open to intermediaries, and that messages passed through other people would be treated the same as direct contact. She did not do this with drama. The cousin relayed it matter-of-factly, the way you relay information from someone who has made a decision and communicated it clearly. The decision was communicated clearly. I did not respect it clearly. What followed the door closing was a year and a half of behavior that I am going to account for because it is part of the story and because leaving it out would be another form of the self-serving that got me here. I called. Many times, before the block went up, and then through other numbers after, which got blocked in turn. I emailed. I showed up at her house once, in month 2, and stood on the porch and rang the bell and she did not answer and the light stayed off, and I stood there long enough to understand that she had seen me on whatever doorbell camera she had installed and had made a decision, and the decision was not to answer. I wrote letters. Some of them were genuine and remorseful and said things that needed to be said and that I meant. Some of them, I have to be honest, were not entirely genuine. Some of them were the performed remorse of someone who wanted a specific outcome and had learned that remorse was the currency the outcome required. I am not sure Renata could tell the difference. I am not sure I always could. I told people my version. Friends, family, anyone who would listen. The version in which I had said something regrettable in a moment of extreme stress and my daughter had responded with a nuclear option that was disproportionate to the offense. I used words like overreaction. I used phrases like she's always been sensitive. I constructed a history in which Renata's response was the problem rather than the thing that had produced it. Some people accepted this version. They were the people who had not been in the kitchen and who had no reason to interrogate the account of someone they cared about. I am grateful none of them are in my life anymore, not because they were bad people but because their willingness to receive my version without question was not something I should have been permitted to rely on. The people who knew Renata, who had any direct knowledge of who she was and how she moved through the world, did not accept my version. And they left, quietly, the way people leave when they have heard something that does not add up and have decided they do not want to be inside the story being constructed. The business failed completely around month 4. I want to note this not as further evidence of my victimhood but as context for the next piece of behavior, which was the demand. I had lost the business. I had nothing left to borrow against. I was looking at a financial situation that had no soft exit, only hard ones, and I was living in a rental I could not afford for much longer. I was 61 years old and the options available to 61-year-old women in financial collapse are not the same options available to younger people, and all of this is true and real and produced genuine desperation. And in that genuine desperation I did something that I cannot explain except as the final, clarifying expression of an entitlement I had been carrying my whole life and had never been forced to fully confront. I had my cousin deliver a message to Renata. The message said that I needed her to reconsider selling the house. That the situation had become critical. That whatever had happened between us was something we could address later but that the immediate priority had to be the financial emergency and that she had the means to help and family helped family in emergencies, and I was asking her, through the cousin, to please consider selling the house and using the equity to help me stabilize. I sent that message to a woman I had told, 18 months earlier, to ask her son why she had brought him into the world. I sent it and I waited for a response as though the response were something I had any standing to expect. The cousin came back with a reply that was short enough for me to reproduce from memory. Renata had said, "Tell her no. Tell her not to contact me through you again." That was all. I sat with that message and I felt, for the first time, something I want to try to describe accurately because it is different from the guilt I had been performing and different from the grief I had been displaying and different from the self-pity I had been swimming in for 18 months. I felt the full, specific, total weight of what I had built across my entire life arriving on me all at once. Not just the kitchen. The kitchen was the visible wound but it was not the whole of it. The whole of it was 61 years of a woman who had moved through the world taking up space she believed she was entitled to. Offering opinions on her daughter's choices that were not requested and not gentle. Arriving at her daughter's door with a financial demand dressed up as a family conversation. Standing in a kitchen and saying what she said to a child who had done nothing to her and then, when the door closed, spending 18 months trying to negotiate her way back in without doing the actual work of understanding why the door had closed. The weight of it was considerable. Part 1 ends there. Not with a dramatic scene. With me sitting in an apartment, I cannot afford receiving a 2-sentence message from my daughter that told me everything I needed to know about where I had arrived. 61 is old enough to know better. I want to start part 2 there because the age is relevant and because I have spent too much time using it in the wrong direction, as context for sympathy rather than as evidence of a failure that has no excuse of inexperience attached to it. I was not a young person making young mistakes. I was a 61-year-old woman who said what she said to a child and then spent a year and a half being primarily focused on the inconvenience of the consequences. The financial collapse completed itself around month 6. I lost the rental. I moved in with my sister, who is 70 and lives alone and who received me with a generosity I had not fully earned and that I am still trying to be worthy of. She has a spare room and a particular brand of love that does not require me to be other than I am while also not pretending I am better than I have been, and living with her has been the most honest housing I have ever had. She knows what happened. I told her the real version, not the version I had been giving other people, because she is my sister and she has known me for 61 years and she would have found the holes in the managed version within the first week. She listened and she was quiet for a long time and then she said, "You said that to a child?" I said yes. She said, "Your grandchild?" I said yes. She did not say anything else that night. She made tea and we sat with it, and the silence between us was the particular silence of someone who loves you and is not going to pretend the thing you did was smaller than it was. The friends who left did so gradually, in the way I described in part 1. What I want to add here is what I noticed in the leaving, because the noticing is part of the accounting. The people who left were not, mostly, people who had heard Renata's version. They were people who had heard mine and had decided it did not hold. That is the thing I had not anticipated, that my version, told by me with the full force of my own genuine distress, was not persuasive to the people who knew me well enough to put it in context. Because the people who knew me well enough to put it in context had their own memories. Of the things I had said about Simon's birth when he was coming. Of the opinions I had delivered about Renata's choices over the years, the not asked for assessments of her relationships and her parenting and her financial decisions. Of the business conversations where I had made clear that I expected the people close to me to be available as resources when I needed them. They put my version of the kitchen next to their memory of me across the years, and the picture that emerged was not the picture of a woman who had had a single catastrophic moment under unbearable stress. It was the picture of a woman who had always been capable of this, who had been moving toward this in smaller increments for years, and for whom the kitchen was not an aberration but an escalation. I was not able to see that clearly until I was living in my sister's spare room with nowhere else to put the truth. Simon is 10 now. He has been 10 for 3 months. I know this because I remember when he was born and I can do arithmetic, not because I was told or included or considered. His birthday passed and I knew it was passing and I was not there and I had no right to be there, and the knowing of that is something I carry. I think about what he understood from what I said to him. He was 9 and the word illegitimate is not a word a 9-year-old necessarily has in his vocabulary, but children understand register before they understand content, and the register of what I said to him was unmistakable. He understood that I was saying something about him that was meant to diminish him. He understood it in the way children understand things that are aimed at them, in the body, before the brain catches up. I think about him looking it up. I think about a 9-year-old with a device searching a word his grandmother said to him in a kitchen and finding its definition and putting that definition next to himself and what it means about him in the view of someone who was supposed to be in his corner. I cannot fix that. I want to be clear about that with myself and with anyone reading this. There is no action available to me that reaches back into that kitchen and takes those words out of the air before they land. They have landed. They are inside him now. Whatever relationship he has with them, whatever he has been told by his mother who loves him and who has presumably done the careful, hard work of helping him understand that what his grandmother said in a kitchen is about his grandmother and not about him, whatever processing he has done, I am not party to it, and I do not get to be party to it. I lost the right to be party to it in the kitchen. There is a specific grief in being estranged from a grandchild that I was not prepared for and that I am not going to dress up as something other than what it is. It is not the grief of innocence. I am not a grandmother who did nothing and was cruelly cut off. I am a grandmother who did a specific, harmful thing to a specific child and whose daughter made the correct decision in response. The grief I feel is real and I am not going to pretend it is not, but it is grief that exists downstream of choices I made, and I do not get to present it as a wound that was done to me. This is a distinction I had to work very hard to understand, and that I am still working to hold consistently, because the grief is real enough and large enough to keep trying to reclaim the narrative of victimhood if I let it. The grief says, but I am his grandmother, but I have lost something real, but the punishment is larger than the crime. And I have to answer the grief each time with the accurate response, which is, you are the one who made yourself unavailable to him. The loss is real and it is yours and you built it. Therapy. I want to talk about therapy because it has been the primary site of the honest work and because the honest work is not what I expected it to be. I expected therapy to be a place where I was helped to feel better, where the pain was processed and the grief was validated and I emerged with tools and perspective that would help me move forward. These things are partly true. But what I did not expect was that the moving forward required, as a precondition, a degree of honest accounting that I had been avoiding my entire adult life. My therapist is a woman about Renata's age. She does not let me have the managed version. I have tried to give it to her, in the early sessions, the version where I am a woman who made one mistake under enormous pressure and has been disproportionately punished for it. She received it and then she asked questions that the managed version could not answer cleanly, and the questions kept coming until what was left was something closer to the truth. The truth that has emerged across 8 months of weekly sessions is not comfortable, and I am not going to pretend it is. What emerged is a picture of a woman who has operated from an entitlement she was never forced to fully confront, who has moved through relationships and taken up space and delivered unsolicited verdicts on the lives of people she was supposed to support, who has treated the people closest to her as resources available for her needs and as audiences for her judgments, and who arrived at 61 having never really been made to account for the accumulation of this because the people in her life either did not have the standing to make her account or cared for her enough to absorb rather than confront. Renata, it turns out, had been absorbing for 34 years. And then she stopped. The demand. I have to return to the demand because it represents the clearest possible expression of what I have been, and what I am trying to not continue to be. I told a child his birth was a mistake and then, 18 months later, asked his mother to sell her house to fund my failed business. And I sent that request through a courier as though it were a reasonable thing to ask. As though the 18 months had been a cooling off period after which normal family obligations resumed. My therapist asked me, when I told her about the demand, what I thought that request communicated to Renata. I said that I had hoped it communicated how serious the situation was. That I had hoped she would understand that I was not asking casually. My therapist asked what I thought it communicated about how I understood what I had done. I sat with that for a long time. It communicated that I believed the financial emergency was larger than the harm. That my need was significant enough to supersede the boundaries she had established in response to something I had done to her child. That the relationship between us could be put on pause for her feelings and then reactivated for my needs, and that this was a reasonable model for how a mother-daughter relationship worked. It communicated that I had not understood anything. My therapist did not say this. I arrived at it and said it and she let it sit in the room. I am 61 years old and I am living in my sister's spare room and the business is gone and the relationship is gone and the estrangement is complete and the grandchild I do not see turned 10 3 months ago. I want to talk about what I am doing with this, not because I deserve credit for it and not because the doing undoes anything, but because I am trying to be honest about the full picture and the full picture includes what I do now. I am in therapy and I am doing the honest work. This is the most useful thing I can offer. I have stopped telling the managed version to anyone. My sister has the real version. My therapist has the real version. The few remaining people in my life who have asked have received as close to the real version as I can get, which includes the kitchen and includes the demand and includes the 18 months of behavior that fell between them. Some people have responded to the real version with a kind of compassion that makes me uncomfortable because I do not believe I have earned it. I receive it anyway because refusing it is its own kind of performance. I have stopped attempting to contact Renata. This happened around month 14 and it was not a single decision but a gradual one, the slow understanding that every attempt was not an expression of genuine remorse but an expression of need, the need to be let back in, the need for the estrangement to end, the need for the situation to resolve in a way that gave me relief. Those are my needs. They are not Renata's obligation. She is living her life. She is raising Simon. She is doing it in a house she did not sell and without the interference of a mother who spent 34 years delivering unrequested verdicts on her choices. She is, from what I can gather through the absence of information, fine. More than fine. Living the life she built. I think about what I would say if she ever opened a door. Not because I am planning for it or expecting it or using it to keep hope alive in a way that is really about my comfort rather than her autonomy. I think about it the way you think about something that may never happen and that you have no right to make happen but that you want to be prepared for honestly if it does. I would not ask for anything. That is where I would start, with the understanding that I no longer have asks. I have forfeited the position from which asks are made. What I would want to offer, if she ever opened a door, is the real version. Not the version in which the kitchen was a moment of unbearable pressure producing a regrettable statement. The version in which the kitchen was the most visible expression of something I had been for 61 years, and that I am attempting, now, and the time I have left, to be instead of. I would want to tell Simon, if I ever had the chance and if Renata decided that chance was something she could offer, That what I said in the kitchen was about me, not about him. That his birth was not a mistake. That there is nothing illegitimate about him. That he is exactly and completely and entirely what he is supposed to be, and that his grandmother was someone who did not know how to see that clearly, and that the failure of seeing was hers and not his. I would want to tell him that. I do not know if I will get to. The hardest thing I have had to sit with, and I want to end here because it is the truest thing and the thing I most need to say out loud, is this. She was right. Renata was right. The door closing was right. The total no contact was right. The refusal to sell the house was right. The refusal to respond to the demand was right. Every single protective choice she made in response to what I did was correct and appropriate, and the expression of a woman who understood, finally, that absorbing my behavior was not something she was required to do, and that her son's interior life was not something I was entitled to access after I had done what I did to it. She was right and I was wrong, and the wrongness did not begin in the kitchen. The kitchen was just the moment it became undeniable. I have spent 61 years being the center of my own story in a way that left very little room for the real shape of the people around me. My daughter spent 34 years in that periphery, seen through the lens of my opinions and my needs and my judgments, loved conditionally and assessed constantly, and asked, finally, to sell her house after I told her son his birth was a mistake. She said no. She closed the door. She protected her child. That is the story. Not of a difficult mother and a sensitive daughter. Not of a misunderstood woman and a disproportionate response. The story of a woman who used up the grace available to her and arrived, at 61, at the logical and entirely deserved end of it. And the cruelest clarity of all, the one that arrives in the spare bedroom at night when there is nothing left to construct around it, is that the daughter who made that call, who said no and closed the door and built her life without me in it, is exactly the kind of woman I should have been doing better to deserve. She learned it somewhere. She did not learn it from me.